Welcome. Welcome to our second Think and Thrive and the final Think and Thrive for this term. We really enjoy getting to bring special guests to speak to students, to tell them about their career journeys, and also just to give them some life advice. And today we have two special people with us. First of all, we have Kevin Joseph from year 13, who volunteered to be our moderator today. And our other special guest, coming from outside of Sunmark, is Dr. Ryan Penny. He is one half of the Wellness Brothers, as they're known here in Dubai. He is a homeopathic doctor, and he does a lot of work around coaching. So, PE people that are here, I hope you enjoy, and I hope you get to ask lots and lots of good questions at the end. So without further ado, let's welcome Kevin and Dr. Ryan Penny to our stage. Thank you.
So, hello everyone and welcome to our Think and Thrive series. And today we're with Dr. Ryan Penny. How are you today?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Really good to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
So first we're gonna ask and understand a little bit more about you. So where were you born and brought up?
So I was born in Pretoria, South Africa, and lived there pretty much all my life until we moved to Dubai in 2005.
So what did you like about school and what did you not like?
Okay, so when I get to talk about school, it's not for academic reasons. When I was at school, I loved playing sport. So I was there literally to get through the first 5 or 6 hours of the day and then head to the sports field. So I loved that. I think school was probably a lot more simple back then than what it is now. But I enjoyed the people. I enjoyed the teachers. I enjoyed just the opportunity to see friends. Yeah, certainly not too high on the academic side of things, at least for the first part.
So you liked sports, and when you were younger, you obviously had a dream of what you wanted to be. Would you want to elaborate?
Sure. When I was very young, it was probably along the lines of wanting to be the standard kinds of things, a policeman, a fireman. But by the time I was about 10, 11, 12, I just wanted to be a professional footballer. So pretty much anything I did at that point in time was aimed at training and preparing myself to play soccer.
Mm-hmm. So you are from South Africa and you've lived here for quite a long time.
Yep.
What languages do you speak?
I speak English and Afrikaans, which is from South Africa, and I understand a little bit of German.
Oh, that's interesting. Who have you idolized maybe when you were younger, growing up?
For me, the person who probably stands out most in my life was my grandfather. My grandfather, I had the privilege of knowing until he died. I was 31 at that time. He was an amazing man, somebody who achieved at the highest level of sport. He actually played football for South Africa and held the world record at one stage. He played before and after the war. He scored a hat-trick in an international. At that point, scored 3 goals in 3 minutes, which put him on the world record list. But the thing that probably stood out for me most was his humility and his kindness. He was a man who achieved so much and yet never allowed that to sort of get to his head, but he used so much of that experience in life. And I got to see somebody who, again, achieved the highest level of things, lived things out in just a very real way. So as an example and an idol, it would be him 10 times out of 10.
That's a really nice story. So you've co-authored 2 books with your brother, which you guys go by the Wellness Brothers.
Yep.
So what was the experience like, and what would you have maybe learned, and what was the best part of it?
So when I decided to write this book, the only reason I'm on the top is because I spent most of the time writing. It was one of those situations where I'd been thinking about a lot of things for a long time. I'd been working at a particular clinic and developing a system for them, and they afforded me time to spend thinking and processing. And what I realized was I needed to get this down on paper. So the book was actually written more for me than anybody else, to take all the things that I've been thinking about. And because Sean and I pretty much do everything together, It was a matter of, okay, you bring the practical part at the end. So we took some time in 2011, took my family away to Thailand, and we spent 2 months there, and I spent most of the time cooped up in a little room writing. My family reminds me of that often, that I did not spend the time with them on the beach. But that laid the foundation for writing this particular book, the one that is here. And then Sean got to tag the end, the practical application, the last 2 chapters on the end. So it was not something we worked on specifically together, but he took the basic parts of what I'd been working on and then translated that into, okay, here's what you do with it.
So you enjoy writing, but do you enjoy reading? And if so, what's your favorite book?
So reading is fantastic. I do enjoy that. I have probably not enough time by choice to spend reading as much as I would like. Writing, one thing, yes. Speaking, another. Reading, my favorite book, it's always a challenge when one wants to narrow it down to one thing, but probably the book that had the biggest impact on me was a book called Don't Waste Your Life. It was written by a guy by the name of John Piper, and I read it about 15 or 16 years ago, and certainly just gave me a real sense of life is a gift, and it should be used purposefully. So Don't Waste Your Life had a really big impact on me.
So now, a bit of more fun questions, and
Those weren't fun?
you can say.
Okay, good.
So obviously the World Cup's happening right now.
Yes.
What team are you supporting?
I would probably have to go with Brazil, as cliche as that is, but yeah.
What is your favorite hobby?
Hobby-wise, I'd probably have to narrow it down to something sport. That would be probably the category that I would put hobbies into. And at the moment, we'll be playing squash and paddle tennis.
Okay. And where is your favorite place to go?
At this point in time, because of how much my daughters enjoy, it's Zanzibar.
Oh, that's an interesting one.
Yeah.
So now let's explore a bit about your professional journey. So what made you want to become a homeopathic doctor and life coach?
So what happened was, as I said, academically, it wasn't really what I was focusing on at school. Everything was geared towards heading to play football initially in America. I had a scholarship to go and play there. And things were sort of lined up in a way that back in South Africa, there was still a compulsory military call-up. And that particular year that I was supposed to leave to go to the States, I was supposed to be called up to the military a couple of months before I was going to leave. So it was going to be a bit tricky. So the school that I was at was very kind. We had a wonderful headmaster who happened to be the head of the South African Football Association, and he knew me very well. And he said, "You're welcome to come play soccer back at the school, and then when you need to go, you can go." And the day before I went back to school, I dislocated my elbow in a soccer match and arrived at school like that, unable to do anything. So what happened was I started paying attention a little bit more at school than what I had done before, and I actually realized, it's actually not as tough as what I thought it was, and started enjoying that. And as a part of that year, there was a guest speaker who was invited to come and speak to what was our final year dinner. And I heard this guy speaking about homeopathy, and I didn't know much about it. But at that stage, I was already thinking, well, I'm probably not going to end up playing football because my scholarship was now in question. So I thought, well, maybe something physiotherapy-like. I like the idea of somebody sort of coming in and then doing some treatment and leaving. I wasn't really keen on the surgical side of things. So I heard this guy speak, and I'm like, that sounds pretty interesting. And I went and spoke with him after the actual dinner, and he was very kind. He said, come around to the practice anytime, and I'll show you around. And there happened to be a course starting the following year, which was the first intake for a master's degree in homeopathy, and it was probably 60, 70 kilometers from where I lived, so it seemed an option. So at that point, it was a very rapid transition from just thinking football to, okay, well, maybe something else. So probably only 2 or 3 months. And by the time I finished the academic year, I actually had really spent quite a bit of time paying attention to biology and science, which I really ended up enjoying. And that translated pretty quickly into then beginning the studies in homeopathy. So that was a 5-year degree, master's degree. And pretty much by the time I had gotten started, I knew this is exactly where I want to be.
So there's a basic belief in homeopathy that like cures like. Could you please explain and talk more about being a
Sure.
homeopath?
It sounds pretty weird, right? Like cures like. So that is the philosophy that classical homeopathy is based on. In around the late 1700s and early 1800s, there was a German doctor, Samuel Hahnemann, and he was a medical doctor at that time, and he was a bit disillusioned with medicine because they killed more people than they tended to help. So he was thinking, we need to come up with another plan, but in the process, sort of removed himself from practice and started translating books. And what he found was in some of the books that he was translating, he found this interesting piece of information where when people took a certain bark, a certain substance that we now know contained quinine, people started ending up with certain symptoms that looked a lot like malaria. And then he was looking at this and saying, but we use quinine to treat malaria. And he started toying with the idea, as he did some more research, that there are times when you have a substance that in a certain potency or a certain strength can actually benefit in a way that that same potency or same substance in a very high concentration might do damage. So the idea was, if I use an example as coffee, if I took stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks of coffee, it'd probably kill me, right? If I took quite a lot of coffee, it'd probably just, put me on, not quite kill me, but sort of slow me down. But just a small amount is probably likely to stimulate me and get me going. So we understand that now as what we call the principle of hormesis, which is now better understood in terms of scientific circles. But the principle that he observed, which again homeopathy is based on, is if something is going to cause a disease entity in a strong or a high concentration, there's a good chance that that same substance in a very dilute form could actually treat somebody who had similar symptoms. So it was really a matter of, could I match the picture of the disease to the picture of the toxicology of the substance? And if I could do that and then find the right potency, the right strength, and the right frequency, that I could actually stimulate the body to heal itself. So it's very philosophical. As I say, there are many people who would challenge that, but I think there's some pretty good research right now to suggest that certainly in the category that I practice in, clinical homeopathy, there's some good grounds for that.
So you're saying there's good grounds, but do people ever challenge you when you try to offer them alternate therapies?
The privilege I have now is people don't generally come and challenge me. But back in the early days, there were always people who had an issue. People would approach it from the scientific side and say, well, how is it possible that if you dilute something so many times it passes what we term Avogadro's number, then there's nothing left in the substance? How can that be effective? And then there would be others who would say, from a religious perspective, oh, that seems pretty mystical, that seems pretty weird. So in the early years, sort of 25 years ago, people would challenge me on those two things very readily. My approach to that was always a matter of, I'm not telling you you have to do this. I'm saying to you that we have an opportunity to use something that I think there is good evidence for, and certainly not going to do you any harm. So if it's something you'd like to try, my recommendation is always, if you can afford it, if it's not going to do any harm and it potentially can help, give it a chance, give it a go. And that's what a lot of people started doing. And it didn't take long before a number of people realized that there was a lot of benefit to be derived. So as I say, in the early days, lots of sort of tension over the subject. But nowadays, I can't think last when I had somebody had an actual issue with homeopathy.
So there's been great growth in the industry for alternate therapies. So what is your outlook, and where do you see it heading in the future?
So I think it's probably worth saying the reason I think it's grown is twofold. I think, number one, that it has become more known. There certainly have been sort of mainstream sort of groups who have taken on the practice of homeopathy or complementary medicine more in an integrated form. So they're saying, let's not be bound by the philosophy of one thing or modern medicine, but let's see how we can sort of pull the best of both. So I think that's been one of the main reasons why there's been a fair growth of complementary medicine. And the other part probably related to the fact that medicine as a whole certainly comes with potential side effects and complications, and people are a little bit more concerned about that. So people were looking for ways in which they might improve their health without some of the risks associated with conventional medicine. So I think those two things have led to the growth to this point. Where do I think that's going to go? I think the reality is it will continue on the path of integration, which is certainly what I would hope, where the growth is going to come more from the research and study side to add sort of or validate the practices as we see them. I think you're always going to have people who are going to take it from more of the philosophical side, and that will continue to some degree. But I think that the outlook for complementary medicine is probably in the future more of an integration with mainstream medicine. That's what I think.
So you're the founder of Perspective for Life,
Yep.
and it's a theoretical model of how people think, live, and learn.
Hmm.
So what is Perspective for Life?
So Perspective for Life is really, it's an approach to coaching and counseling and self-help. The idea is, can we help people understand motivation? Can we help people understand perspective and understand their limits and understand how people learn and grow, so as to apply those principles and that understanding to living more stable, successful, and satisfying lives. So Perspective for Life is really a collection of things that I've been working on for many years. The book was probably the start to piece together an understanding or a way of explaining to people, again, how we think and how we behave and what the outcomes are. So Perspective for Life is based on that theoretical model. I have 7 basic concept diagrams that explain the things that we've spoken about. And it's really built on the idea that we live it as we see it. In other words, our behavior is a reflection and the product of our perspective. You know, people do what they do because of what they believe at the end of the day. So Perspective for Life aims to say we live in a real world. You know, there are certain tangibles. We live in a world of cause and effect. You do one thing, there is pretty much an outcome that you can expect. And to try and draw people back to the understanding that your belief doesn't alter reality. Your belief can be yours and you're entitled to it, but reality remains reality. And the closer we can be aligned in our thinking with what's real, the more likely we would be to rightly interpret what's happening in our lives, and then be better positioned to make the kinds of decisions that would have the kinds of outcomes that would be what we would want. So Perspective for Life, again, is that coaching, counseling, sort of accumulation of material to try and help people live, you know, more consistently with the reality that isn't always pleasant, to bring about the kinds of lives and things that we would hope.
So what is a life coach, and how are they different to therapists and healers?
In a situation like that, I would sort of differentiate personally along these lines. I think a coach is somebody who would look at people who there isn't something specific they're trying to treat. They're saying, well, we have somebody here who has potential. Let's go ahead and see how we can encourage them, motivate them, direct them in terms of their behaviors and training, and grow them to reach the sort of levels that they would like to reach, to coach them to reach their goals, to coach them to succeed in the things that they would like to succeed in. I think when it comes to counseling, the assumption is there's a problem, whatever that problem might be, mentally, emotionally, socially, that a person needs to be guided in how to process things, and then how to interpret things, and how to apply those things that they've learned to trying to live in a way that enables them to enjoy possibly a more stable, again, balanced kind of life. And a healer, I would say to you, is probably the broadest definition, or the broadest sort of scope. I think anybody who's attempting to bring about an improvement in somebody's health that falls outside of the medical sort of counseling or coaching model is probably in the category of healer. I think what they have in common is each one is trying to help people to enjoy greater levels of satisfaction in terms of health and function and well-being.
So, what do you consider success in both of your professions, since you're a homeopathic doctor and a life coach?
So success, I would first of all probably want to define as achieving what you set out to achieve. So when I set out to achieve, what I set out to achieve when I was doing, homeopathy was to try and take care of people in a way that helped them look, feel, and function in the way that they would like. So what I realized was that that required probably a lot more attention to the mental and emotional side of things than what is probably considered by most people who are practicing medicine or prescribing. So success was aimed at, can I help a person who comes to see me achieve what they're setting out to achieve or get as close to that as possible? So the success, I would say, both in the coaching and the homeopathy is helping people, again, achieve their health and well-being goals, or in the coaching side, their performance kind goals. And with that, would I be able to have a career or have a profession that enabled me to take care of my family, to take care of my wife and my 3 girls? And I'm very thankful to say that the career path that I've been on and where I am right now, there is success in those areas which one had set out to, sort of achieve. So I'm very thankful for that.
So, what was your most interesting case you've ever had?
One of the challenges when a person asks for the most, it's always assuming that there is a one standout. And sort of over 23, 24 years of practice, I probably have too many to narrow it down to one. What I could say is that I've been privileged to see many people work their way through many challenging things, both physically. Sometimes people are given a diagnosis that is terminal. This means pretty much the end for you in 6 months or a year. And we've been privileged to see some people live well beyond that by doing good things. We've seen people who have been so depressed that there's no point in living. They want to end their own lives, go on and sort of pull through that and become useful, productive people. One that comes to mind right now is a young guy who I met probably when he was about 19. He was schizophrenic. He was drug-induced, and he was pretty much suicidal. And today he's married with a child of 2 years and another one on the way. So I think we could sit for hours and hours thinking back to those kinds of cases. But those are the ones that come to mind.
So you said as speaker is why you wanted to do this, but was that the only spark you had, or was there one later on in your course of life?
I think probably the shift towards what I'm doing a lot more of now came through dealing with people more and more. As I said, when I set out and practice in terms of what this guy had spoken about with homeopathy, you can try and help people improve their health and well-being, and with minimal side effects and these kinds of things. It was much more prescriptive in the early years. So I was aiming, can I prescribe the right medication? Can I come up with the right diagnosis to do that? I think what I've learned over time, and especially with things that have changed so much now, if you want information on the condition I mentioned, schizophrenia, every one of you could quickly go ahead on your phone and know what schizophrenia was. Back in the day when I was studying, it was a matter of you need to go to the library and find a book or find a professor who's going to teach you what that's about. So the idea for me was, even when I wrote this book, this is less about knowing information. Very, very few people now are at a loss for information. What I found was that people struggle to translate what they know into action, which is what's required for success. So I think that the direction for me, the things that have sparked more and more interest, is how do you help a person who probably has the skills to do certain things, understand things, process things, be motivated to translate, again, the information which is freely available into the kind of action that produces results. So I think that sort of, the whole time of writing this book, that was sort of a second wind, if it were, to continue on the path that I'm on now.
So now let's have some fun, and we're going to do some rapid fire questions.
Let's see.
So I want you to answer in 0 seconds. You have no time.
Okay.
So in the past week, month, or year, what was your most positive moment?
The time spent with my family in Zanzibar.
Weekdays or weekend?
Weekend.
Books or music?
Music.
Apple or Android?
Apple.
Mountain or beaches for holiday?
Beaches.
Describe yourself in 3 words.
Patient, thankful, content.
Self-help books or personal coaching?
Both.
If you could change one thing about you, what would that be?
I could spell better.
What was your last Google search?
MSC Cruises.
Dancing or singing?
Neither.
What do you not want me to ask you?
That question.
So, thank you for the fun and interesting rapid fire round.
Thank you,
But
Kevin.
before we open the floor to the audience, we have a couple more questions for
Sure.
you. What's the best career advice you ever received?
That's probably the most important question we've had so far, seeing as though you didn't come here to find out about me, right? The best advice I had was from a friend of mine. It was a little bit, I had already been in practice for a couple of years. He was a very wealthy young guy, and I had made just a little bit of money, really a little bit of money, and I said to him, where should I invest this? And he said, how much? And I told him, and he said, go on a holiday rather. So I was like, okay, no, seriously. What he said, well, do you believe in what you're doing? I said, sure. He said, then invest in yourself. Invest in what you're doing and stick to what you know. So if I had to take the advice that he gave me, which was very applicable, I would simply say this. Take the advice. First of all, get to know what you know as well as what you can. Apply yourself to doing and learning as much as you possibly can in the area that you want to excel in, and then stick to it. Things don't happen overnight. Things take time. Be patient, persevere. Persevere in the area that you know and deliver good things with that.
So, how do you plan to motivate yourselves when an obstacle hits you?
Okay, obstacles never come. Yes? No? Obstacles are inevitable, right? Everybody's going to find difficulties, challenges, frustrations. Generally, I'm an optimistic individual, so I don't find myself having to really pick myself up very often. And I think partly is because what I understand is that a goal is actually a poor motivator. And whenever I say it, people are like stunned. I thought goals were supposed to motivate you. And I'll explain that possibly a little bit later. But I find that what motivates me the most is to recognize, who am I? You know, who is it that I want to be? So I use my identity, whether that's as a husband or as a father or as a practitioner or as a brother or as a friend, and say, how would I behave right now? Even though I might feel down, I might feel frustrated, those kinds of things shouldn't get in the way of me doing what I need to do, and I'll do those things because of my roles, my responsibilities, and the character that I want to live out. So I find the best motivation comes from being consistent with who I am.
And how do you personally motivate yourself?
So again, sometimes I have to remind myself of who I am, and that is one of the most important things, that I am not perfect, that I have significant limitations. And you'll say, well, how is that motivating? That doesn't sound positive at all. No, it allows me to function well within the framework of what I can actually do. And that allows me to succeed at certain things. I don't end up taking on things that would be beyond me, because when you tend to take on things that are beyond you, you tend to fail. Now, I've got no problem with failing. In fact, I'm all in favor of people taking risks and failing and learning to deal with the emotional challenges that come with that. But for me personally, it really, really comes down again to who am I, and do the things I need to do based on my understanding of my limitations, and that is certainly motivating to me.
So before we give it to the audience, what is the key advice you give athletes to motivate themselves?
So the subject of motivation, generally when we consider motivation, what we're saying is, how do I help a person, how do we develop the drive to do what it is that they need to do to get to where they want to be? So when it comes to athletes, that's one of the groups that generally has a goal. They want to go to the Olympics, they want to achieve this or achieve that. So for them, it's one of those things to remind them often about what it is they're actually doing this for, but to recognize that people are different. What motivates one athlete may be something completely different to what motivates another athlete. So I would like to understand the person. If this is a person, for example, who's achieved a lot in their career, I sat once with the world's leading polo player. He had been the world's best for nearly 20 years, and he said to me, you know, I've won everything. I've done everything. How do I motivate myself to keep playing? And I said to him, well, my guess is you can do things better than most other people. I mean, he wasn't arrogant. He just said, yeah. I said, then go out and style. Go out and in your game, do things that nobody's expecting. Do things that nobody else is going to do. He ended up playing for another 3 or 4 years just by simply saying, wow, I don't have to just go through the routine. So there's somebody who you can challenge with, be brilliant. Somebody else might be, you motivate them by helping them achieve, you know, small wins along the way. Don't give them something so big that shakes their confidence. You might give them something reasonably small and they achieve it and they're like, okay, well, I've got some foundation here. And they build, build, build. So motivating anybody comes down to knowing that person, knowing what they want, knowing what they believe, knowing what they're like, and then finding a good fit.
So thank you very much, and we're now going to have the audience ask some questions.
Thank you, Kevin. Easy ones, huh? Good.
Aangename kennis, meneer.
Ja, gaan we met jou?
Baie goed kan ek kla nie.
Goed.
One question I would like to ask is
Yes.
what menial everyday tasks can we take in order to help apply the theory, the knowledge we know to actual practices we can do?
So what I would take from that particular question first is the acceptance of the fact that life is lived in the minor key. In other words, most of life are filled with menial tasks. And if we're looking for the high notes and the high life, which is what we're led to believe is what reality is, we're going to be horribly disappointed. So I think looking at the mundane and recognizing I need to do the mundane, everyday, menial things well for possibly reasons of identity and purpose and those kinds of things, you find that when those kinds of things become second nature, it allows you then to step it up to do the bigger things when the opportunity arises.
Thank you very much.
Which university did you go to if you did attend, and what did you study then?
Okay, so I went to what is now called the University of Johannesburg, and I did a master's degree in homeopathy. So it was something that was pretty new back then. I started studying in 1993. It was my first year at that particular university. And it involved pretty much the basic sciences. You know, we did physics and chemistry and biology and anatomy and physiology and sociology and epidemiology and diagnostics and pathology and then everything else that related to homeopathy and everything from there. So 5 years of intense study into trying to figure out what makes people sick and how we can help them get better.